Good morning. Today, for following along the message for our hearts, have the folder open to page 8 and 9 and 10. It's the story from Exodus chapter 32 of how God's people worshiped a golden calf shortly after he had gotten them out of Egypt and out of slavery. It's a long text, but I think I'll be able to tell it in such a way you should be able to stay with me and see the depth of what God is trying to show us just by telling the story. Before I get into the story, I want to tell you a story about Jeff, Bill, and Diane. Jeff and Bill were buddies, best friends, both played on the football team of their small Oklahoma town. Bill played quarterback, Jeff played running back. They were great friends. They decided not to go off to college. They went and got jobs at the local, one of them at the tractor dealership and the other one at the auto dealership in town, and they had really good jobs. And it was a couple of years out of high school that Jeff fell in love with Bill's sister, Diane. And Bill warned him, he said, I've got several sisters, but this is the one that's got the wildest streak in her. You might want to think twice before you date my sister, but I'll support you in it. And Jeff said, no, I'm falling in love with her. And they had a 2-year courtship, planned a wedding with a difficult mother-in-law, and got married and went off on a honeymoon that Jeff paid for completely. It was a beach honeymoon at a resort down in the Caribbean. They were going to be there for 10 days. In the middle of that honeymoon, like the third day, Jeff got called up at work and he had to get online. He had to sit and keep his face in the computer for like 2 days in the hotel room. Diane was bored. She laid out on the beach and sunbathed, and some beach stud came up and started giving her a whole lot of attention. Remember, she's the one with the wild streak. On her honeymoon with Jeff, she ended up committed adultery with some beach stud. How do you feel hearing that story about what happened to Jeff? Jeff represents God in the story of Exodus 32. Bill represents Moses, and Diane represents Israel. The reason I started with a story like that is you and I, we watch those kind of scripts and those plots all the time and get drawn into them. We can read the Bible and see the stories like the golden calf, and we've heard it a lot of times, and we don't get so drawn in. We sort of stay kind of oblivious. But today, if you will follow me and watch what's happening to God, we don't normally talk that way either. Watch what's happening to God. We were so busy talking about what's happening to me. Oh my goodness. His heart was broken. He had picked a stiff-necked people with a wild streak. He had chosen her, Israel. And he chose her against better judgment based on the law to be his own people. Of all the people groups in the whole world, he chose Israel to be his own. And he worked mightily to get them out of Egypt. Remember the 10 plagues and sending Moses? And he got them out of Egypt. And once he got them out of Egypt, think of the geography, he went south with them to a mountain and called Moses up there. And now it's time to set up house with his bride. And he's going to give them 10 commandments and a whole bunch of ceremonial laws to go with that. And Moses is on the mountain 40 days. He's got his face in the computer. People look around and say, where's Moses? And where's the God that got us out of Egypt? Remember how fantastic those plagues were and how recent they had been. That we're in what, July 2nd? This would be like May 15th. Maybe even later that those had happened. And they're already like, where's the God that saved us? And they started committing idolatry. So let's get into the story. Maybe now you can be a little bit more empathetic with God and want to feel the pathos of what's going on. Because the theme of what we learn from this chapter, and it's intentional from 1 Corinthians 10, the Spirit tells us in the New Testament, these are warnings about us. So the theme of anybody reading Exodus 32 should be, you hear the Spirit saying to you, don't cheat on God. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and they said, come, let us make gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. He's in the hotel room. Aaron answered them, take off the gold earrings that your wives and your sons and your daughters are wearing and bring them to me. So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took them and he handed them and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Remember, he did that work. Then they said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. Of the pantheon that Egypt had, there was a god, a calf god that was like Baal, but it was a different god, named God, and it was a fertility god, which meant there were always orgies around it. So this calf thing is kind of like theming into what they had seen in Egypt. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, tomorrow there will be a festival to notice the all capital letters, to Jehovah. So Aaron is kind of playing the middle. He's kind of trying to hold on to the belief for them that Jehovah delivered them, but let them worship the calf. He's mixing it up, trying to placate them and compromise. There'll be a festival to the Lord. So the next day the people rose early and they sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterward they sat down to eat and drink. And maybe Aaron's thinking, all right, at least we got the Lord's name in there. They had done this in chapter 24. Remember, this is 32, when they sat down with God with fellowship and burnt offerings once when Moses had come down from the mountain earlier. Afterward, they sat down to eat and drink, and what did they do? They got up from that, and they indulged in revelry. That's partying hard on whatever available alcohol and drugs there was. That's partying hard with free sex in all forms. Revelry, that's what that means. It's just a euphemism for that. Okay. Jeff called home to talk to his best friend, brother of the bride, Bill. Jeff just saw what happened. He came out of the hotel room. There she was on the beach with another guy. God says to Moses, they're up on the mountain. Moses isn't God. Moses can't see down the mountain. He doesn't know what's going on down there. Get in verse 7 with me. Then the Lord said to Moses, go down, because your people, that's real significant. That's why I had it highlighted in yellow. Your people whom you brought up out of Egypt have become corrupt. God is already having feelings of divorce. You need to know, if you know broader reading of a text, in chapter 24 of Egypt, it was a huge big thing that God said, I will be your God and you will be my people. And that's all brought up again in the New Testament, that we are God's people. So here when he goes, your people whom you brought, Moses, they are committing adultery against me. They've become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them on my honeymoon. And they have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it, sacrificed to it, and have said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. Come on, Bill. Your sister is doing this to me. God's emotions are steaming and he's hurt. I have seen these people, the Lord said to Moses, and they are a stiff-necked people. And so just leave me alone, so that in my anger I may burn against them, that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation. What a temptation for Moses. Moses is like Abraham and David and Joseph of the Old Testament. He's a friend of God. It seems like as you read through the Old Testament story, almost every generation, God picks a man and develops in him a friend for God who's among the human family who gets God more than most people. Moses gets God, and he gets it that his God, his friend, is steaming mad. But Moses hasn't yet fully emotionally taken in the hurt that God is experiencing because Moses hasn't seen it firsthand. Moses is up on the mountain human that hasn't been there firsthand. So Moses is able to be objective. Now, try this on. It's going to be hard for you because you're not used to hearing this. But God needed a friend. He had made this man into his friend by teaching him his law and his gospel and how much he cared for these people. And if you read the story further, he keeps doing that with Moses. But he's made him a friend. And when you're hurting really badly, and I talked to a man this last week who was cheated on, wasn't in my ministry, he's actually out in my secular hobbies. And he said, I had to leave town. I caught my wife with a younger man, and he said, I was going to do something stupid, and I had to leave. I left for a whole 10 days. Went and stayed with my brother, right? God wanted to purge his anger because he was just in his anger that she had done this to him. And yet God didn't want to destroy them, even though he wanted to destroy them. You get it? We oftentimes want to think God doesn't have a personality. He has a personality 10 times without sin, but 10 times like ours. So Moses is a friend, and God's purged to him. And listen to verse 11. Moses sought the favor of the Lord, his God. Lord, he said, why should your anger burn against your people? Remember, he had said, Moses, they're your people. He put it right back to God. Why should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out of Egypt? You can tell these are two friends talking, right? You brought them out of Egypt. No, you brought them out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand. Why should the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he brought them out, to kill them in the mountains and wipe them off the face of the earth? Your reputation's at stake. I know you. You don't want a reputation of being a rash God. Turn from your fierce anger. Don't do something stupid. Relent and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. These are all the patriarchs of Genesis. He says, remember what you told them, whom you swore by your own self. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, i.e., we're not even there yet. We're out down here in the wilderness. You were going to give them the promised land, and it will be their inheritance forever. You made some promises, and you're not going to go back on those. You know that. You're not going to destroy them. I'm not the least bit tempted by you saying that you'll destroy them and then make a great nation from me, because you've got a plan in place that you've revealed to us, and I'm going to call you on that. Don't go against that covenant. Then the Lord relented, and he did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. There's a really good spot here to just take a hard pause, right? Moses just talked God out of judgment. The people would say of Moses throughout history, God listened to that man. They said so. It's in the Bible. God listened to him. Because Moses talked God's language. He knew God's heart. They were friends. He knew, even though God was just, that justice wasn't God's favorite characteristic. His favorite characteristic is grace. Not his justice, but he is just. If his favorite characteristic was justice, there would be no way for you or me to ever make it with God. God's glad to at least have Moses since Israel has turned her back on him. Jeff was glad to have Bill even though his little sister was a mess. He relented. God relented. So here we go. Watch what happens next. It's time for Moses to visit. In my little story of Jeff and Bill and Diane, picture Bill getting on a plane and he's going to go fix this thing, help his sister and his her new husband, his friend. Moses turned and went down the mountain with the 2 tablets, the covenant of the law, the 10 commandments, in his hands. They were inscribed on both sides, by the way, by the finger of God, front and back. The tablets were the work of God. The writing was the writing of God, engraved on the tablets. When Joshua heard the noise, now Joshua is with Moses, but he's not up at the inner place where Moses was at the top. He's like halfway down the mountain. So Moses comes down and he picks up Joshua and he goes further down. When Joshua heard the noise of the people shouting, he said to Moses, "There's a sound of war in the camp." He had heard that before, right? Battles that he'd seen. Moses replied, "It's not the sound of victory. It is not the sound of defeat. It's the sound of singing that I hear. They're partying." Now Moses is starting to get drawn into the emotions that God had, right? Bill comes in and he goes to the beach and sees his sister with that guy, and he starts to get emotionally crushed. He was talking objectively on the phone, but now he's into it, right? Moses gets pulled in. When Moses approached the camp and he saw the calf and the dancing and the anger, and he threw the tablets out of his hands, breaking them into pieces at the foot of the mountain. And he took a calf the people had made, because they're marching up through the crowd, pulls it down, the calf the people had made, and he burned it in the fire. Then he ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and he started shouting, "Now get down and drink out of the water." Theologians fall all over themselves like, why did he do that? Was it this reason or that? I just think he's just stark raving angry. And he's just saying, I'm going to rub your faces in this idolatry. He said to Aaron, "What did these people do to you that you led them into such a great sin?" Sin dulls our senses and makes us think it's not that bad. We use euphemisms like some football coach ends up with an adulterous relationship and loses his position, and he comes on the air and says, "I am guilty of an indiscretion." I think it's more than an indiscretion, my friend. "Do not be angry, my Lord," Aaron answered. "You know how prone these people are to evil. They said to me, 'Make us gods who will go before us.' As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." So I told them, "Whoever has any gold jewelry, take it off." Then they gave me the gold and threw it into the fire. I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf. I had an indiscretion. Remember what it had said? He fashioned it with his own hands. Moses saw that the people were running wild. They're having this conversation, but he's ground up the calf, but the people are still partying. They're not going to give it up that easily. They're running wild, running off with each other's wives, running into the tents, doing crazy things. Let me get back up. Moses saw the people running wild, and Aaron had let them go out of control, and so became a laughingstock to their enemies. So he stood at the entrance to the camp, and he said, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." And all the Levites rallied to him. Now, don't make more of what I'm about to say than I'm saying, but I'm saying there is no rainbow flag in Moses' hand. This is a different time and place and different country than you're in. This is a time of history. If I, as a spiritual leader, did what Moses did right here, I would be probably put to death by the death penalty. For sure, you would all hate me and call me a cult leader. But when we read it in the Bible, we tend to sometimes not see how amazingly different these times were, and yet they were still sanctified by God. Look what he does. Then he said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Each man strap a sword to his side, go back and forth through the camp, from one end to the other." Right here you might add, looking for the ringleaders of this idolatry. And he says, "Each killing his brother or his friend or his neighbor." The Levites, a tribe, they did as Moses commanded. And that day, 3,000 people died. That's how many died in the towers in New York, people. Then Moses said, "You have been set apart to the Lord today, for you were against your own sons and brothers, and he has blessed you this day." And this was the interview and the audition for the Levites to become the priestly family that took care of the temple down through the ages. their loyalty to God above all things, like Matthew 10 when Jesus said above mother, father, son, or daughter. This is justice, right? Served on the ringleaders, the hard-hearted ones that had led all of Israel into this idolatry. God chooses, I'm going to tell you about three characteristics. In his sovereignty, in his justice, and his grace. In his sovereignty, he chooses when he's going to act and how far according to his justice, although his favorite characteristic is always grace. But as sovereign Lord, there are these moments in history where he and his leaders do things like this. Moses knows what I just said. And he knows that the mercy of God for all of his people, including today, you and me, because this nation is going to bring us a Savior from their bloodline. Moses knows there's a whole lot at stake. And so Moses works with God, even though he's not always certain whether he should go left or right. He tells God that in just the next chapter, but that's not for today's sermon. So Moses, the next day, Moses said to the people, I'm going to say, the law has done its work. You have committed a great sin. Bill is talking to his sister, Diane. But now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin, but you may very well have lost your marriage. So Moses went back to the Lord and he said, oh, what a great sin these people have committed. I want to make sure you catch this. Moses talks sense into God when he's not emotionally taking it all in. He goes down from the mountain and gets overwhelmed with the sin and the evil against God, so he takes action according to justice within the limits that God gives him. And then he's ready to go back and beg for the people because Moses gets the bigger picture. God hates being separated from all people, even those who hurt him. And so he comes back for the sake of the people. Moses loves those people. They are his sister. Bill loves Diane. And he loves his friend Jeff. So he's going to do what he can. So Moses comes back having already experienced all that emotion that God has. And he goes, I get it. They have committed a great sin. And I'm here to beg for them. They've committed a great sin. They have made themselves gods of gold. And I put this in highlights again. I want you to see it. But now please forgive their sin. And if not, if you need a payment, blot me out of the book you have written. The book of life that's talked about in Revelation that has your name secured there because you are a believer, you're a friend of God through faith in him. Take me out of the book. Send me to hell forever, rather than reject this whole people and then all the people like us that would be saved by the Savior that would come from them. Rather than in history that way and break all those covenants and then you end up only being the God of justice, just take me out. Man, is he a friend of God? God did not accept it. The Lord replied to Moses, whoever sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. And he's most likely talking about that persistent, arduous, hard-hearted leadership into idolatry kind of sin. Not just happening to sin. Now go lead the people to the place I spoke of, and my angel will go before you. Just a few verses after this, he goes, I'm sending my angel because if I go, I'm going to get so mad at them again. When they do this again, I'm going to kill them. He does actually go with them, but that's another conversation between the friends. However, when the time comes for me to punish, I will punish them for their sin. And the Lord did it. He struck down more people because Moses and the Levites didn't see every heart. They didn't get everybody they were supposed to. And a plague came to the people because of what they did with the calf that Aaron had made. Now, I have to stop chapter-wise because we're only going to go so long in his sermon. But I want you to see the beautiful gospel in Moses, and then I want to finish with our Savior Jesus and you. So Moses says, take me in place of them. This is how he is an image of Christ. Right? Now, I want to tell you, I've been harping on this, how this little story of mine where these two men were best friends, and God and Moses are friends. God and Moses are really tight friends. And Moses is willing to say, you can blot me out for the sake of them because I love Israel. I just want you two to be fine. Humanity and God. Moses knows that God's biggest concern is all of humanity being reunited with him, and he's willing to be a part of that in his own sacrificial way. That gets God's attention. There is a scene in Revelation chapter 5, and all of heaven is upset, and everybody's crying because the Lord Father on the throne is holding a scroll telling the future of this planet, what's going to happen to all of humanity, how this whole story is going to go. It's called the scroll. And it introduces 7 seals on the scroll. There's 7 clay seals over the strings on the scroll, and 7 points or ideas about the future. And no one can open it. This is what God the Father says. Who is worthy to open the scroll? And everybody's walking around heaven going, who is worthy? Who is worthy? And they couldn't find anyone. And John, who's watching the vision, says, I started crying because I was so drawn in that we need to know the future and what God's doing with the future that I wanted to know, and nobody's worthy in all of heaven to open the scroll. And John says a door swung open, and through the door came a lamb looking like it was slain. And the Father said, He is worthy to open the scroll because he gave himself to purchase humanity for me. See, I just said in passing, when Moses made that offer, God the Father said what? He just ignored it, right? You know why? Moses has the heart of Jesus, but he doesn't have the holiness of Jesus. He is not Jesus. Moses cannot redeem Israel. He's not big enough gift. He's not worthy to open the scroll. He's still like you and me. He's Diane's brother. He's not God the Father's son. Right? That was coming. So this story of the darkness of their sin and the grace of God being squeezed out of the Father is for us to find Christ, who replaced Moses and said to the Father, blot me out, send me to hell for them. And the Father said, it kills me, but yes, I'll take your sacrifice for them. What's the highest motivation for you to fight temptation? You're going to be like Diane was on that honeymoon pretty much your whole life. So am I. If it's not outwardly, it's inwardly. We're all stricken with the sin of wild streak, right? But we don't want to. We want to be close to our God, and we want to be his wife, the bride of Christ, as the Bible says. We want to be one with him. We want to be in heaven with him. Like Paul said in Romans 7, the good that I will to do, I do not do. And right there, the person who wants to do good, he says, there's evil right there present with me. Oh, wretched man that I am. We know that. We are Diane. But what's the highest motivation for me to send you out the doors of this church today, that you would not succumb to so much sin, that you'd be more serious but not sad and somber, that you'd make better choices for the right reasons and not be judgmental and angry and only grinding up calves and making people drink them. It's for you to see the Lamb that was slain was the Son of the Father, and the Father and the Son gave him up for you and me. It's the love of God, right? If we were to keep telling the story of Jeff and Diane, Bill tried to pay off the debts that Diane ran up the credit card as she left the honeymoon early with the stud for 3 weeks and then came crawling back. And she ran up a debt she couldn't pay, and she wanted Jeff back, and there's no way to pay it all off. So Bill said to Jeff, I'll pay it. And Bill said, no, you told me she had a wild streak. I've been saving up for years to pay the debt that she was going to charge me. And Diane said, I have a wonderful husband. And being forgiven by him, the forgiveness and the grace that he had for her was the strongest love. Not the emotional love, but the grace and forgiveness that he had for her. And so she didn't, deep down in her soul, she didn't want to sin. Even though right there present with her was this wild streak. That, my friends, is the meaning of Exodus 32. Amen.